Indexi. Thank you for auditing the Always Positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who loves talking about music from former Yugoslavia. I learned to love Yugoslavian music because my wife is Yugoslavian. And in addition to the food, some of the best things about that entire region of the world is their music. So every once in a while I try and do a video. I've done several videos on the singer George Balašević, which you might have seen. And then I'm also trying to showcase different Yugoslavian rock bands for an American audience, trying to show you like what was really good, because there's a lot of great music. So, the first one I recorded in Belgrade of Paket Naranjman, which we'll get back to later. Last year I covered the album by Azra, known as Azra. So we had Paket Naranjman, where the band was mostly from the part of Yugoslavia that is now known as Serbia. Azra is from the part of Yugoslavia that is now known as Croatia. And then last year, for our anniversary, my wife got me this album, Indexi, by the band Indexi. And that was her second anniversary gift to me. So it's been a year, and my third anniversary gift to her is this video. Speaking of anniversaries, to let you understand how interesting of a band Indexi is, they celebrated their 10th anniversary as a band 2 years before the release of their debut album. Okay? Does that give you an idea of how interesting this story is going to be? How does a band release its first album 12 years after it was founded? The story of Indexi, I think, is the story of Sarajevo, a city in Bosnia. It is the story of Bosnia, a part of Yugoslavia. It is a story of Yugoslavia, a country that existed in Europe. And I think most importantly, it is a story about the greatness of humanity. I mean, that's the point. That's why I do this channel. I'm a humanist. I love showing great things that humans have done. And the story and the music and this album, if you like rock and roll, if you like 70s, 60s style rock and roll, if you like musicianship, it is a great, great album. But before I get into what makes it great, let me tell you a little bit about their story. So this book, this is like the Bible for music that is from ex-Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, it's not translated into English. So Petar Janjotovic is the person who wrote it. I've messaged with him a couple times. He's a nice guy. So my wife, actually, I had to spoil the gift. I asked her to translate the entire Indexi section of this. So, who are they? Well, it starts in Sarajevo, where there was a whole rock and roll scene. And a sort of side note to this. When you say Sarajevo to an American, or to most people, they think of the siege of Sarajevo. When you say Bosnia, you think of the War of Bosnia. And it's important to remember history. It's important to think about history. But what I love is how when you study music, it can enlarge what you think of when you think of a place. I did that whole conversation with Anthony Fantano about Ukrainian music because I want people not just to think about suffering and bombings, but to also think about love and art. So Sarajevo, in the 60s, had this great rock scene. And Indexi started off as like a cover group, like an instrumental cover group, which there was a lot of all over Europe. They won a contest, which gave them the opportunity to record a single. This is all the way back in 1963. They eventually got a lead singer who spent his time equally playing basketball. And if you know anything about the Balkans, they are a very tall people. I'm 6'1", and I am short over there. So it kind of makes sense. It makes sense that the greatest basketball player in the world is from Serbia. Well, one of the greatest basketball players in the world. And then they would play, and then they'd play dance parties, and they'd sort of play all over the place. They were just one of these really hard-working bands. Their name, by the way, Indexi, refers to a very particular thing, which apparently they still do, which is like a little notebook that has your grades from school and other notes on your academic performance. That little book is called Indexi. So you could almost think of their name in English as being report card. It's not quite the same because Indexi is so specific to former Yugoslavia. What makes Indexi such a funny band is they are the ship of Theseus. So if you know that expression, there's somewhere in a museum, there's something that is called the ship of Theseus. But what happened was the original ship that Theseus owned had some wood missing, so they replaced some planks. And then some more wood missed, and then they replaced the planks, until eventually the ship that's there is comprised exclusively of planks that did not come from Theseus's ship. And the question is it still Theseus's ship? If Indexi started in 1962, by 1969, none of the original members were still in the band. One of the founding members left in 1969 to do his national military service. So this is a whole other aspect. There's mandatory service in the Yugoslavian army if you were a young man. The whole history of Yugoslavian rock is littered with bands that broke up or were changed. Interestingly enough, that guy who left Indexi in 1969 would then start a different band with this other guy, which would become Bijelo Dugme, which would become the biggest band, basically, that the Balkans has ever seen. You can find some of their early music before this first album on YouTube, such as their cover of Nowhere Man by the Beatles. Jednom smo se svađali, drugi puta ljubili. It's kind of funny, it's kind of well done. Eventually someone named Cornelius Kovac joins, and he's like another famous figure. Like, when you study this, it's amazing, because like when you start studying everything starts overlapping with itself. So not only did you have this one guy who would go on to find Bijelo Dugme, but then we have Cornelius Kovac, who will leave and then start a group called Korni Grupa with the guitar player for Balašević, Josip Bošek, just all these kinds of things working together. And what it really underlines is that these musicians who were working in Yugoslavia in the 70s and 60s were working. Just real workers. Radnici, I think that's the word in Serbo-Croatian for workers. They were working just all the time, wherever they could find a gig, touring the USSR, touring Yugoslavia. And then in private, apparently, according to this excellent book, which even if you don't speak Yugoslavian, you should have it. It's a fascinating book, even though it's Serbo-Croatian. They would be working on the side with like experimental prog rock and psychedelia, and working with Bosnian folk music. Like, they'd be playing with a single hair instrument called a gusle, which is interesting. Gusle. My wife will tell me about it. They recorded the first song that ever went over 10 minutes in 1969. Like the first song in Yugoslavia that ever went over 10 minutes. So they were sort of like this band that was just doing whatever they could to get by, performing, doing covers, playing festivals, whatever. While at the same time, they were this other band that was working really hard to be experimenting and growing and expanding the art form of rock and roll. Perhaps it's not surprising that labels weren't that interested in them, and perhaps that's why they never released an album in their first 12 years. Eventually they'd get a keyboardist, Lesic. He would go on to produce this album. Okay? He produced this. This is done in his studio. This guy who was there for this Indexi thing, 10 years later would end up being or 8 years later, end up being the person behind Pocket Naranjman. Fascinating. They did 70 concerts in Yugoslavia in the year of 1972. That's when they had their 10-year anniversary. And eventually they released an album. Why did they release an album? Why did they record in 1973? Because one of the members had military service. So the history of the world, as Americans understand it, is very narrow and incomplete. We don't really appreciate what any communist or socialist countries did in World War II or after. The history of Yugoslavia is fascinating, but it's definitely built on maintaining a strong military to fight off any kind of threats from the USSR, from the US, or from anybody. So that's sort of built into their history. So they recorded this album because of that. Maybe they never would have recorded it if that hadn't have happened. Now, let's make this bigger. Let's talk about how this album, in a way, represents the entire history of Bosnia, the entire history of Yugoslavia. And I'll tell you about it by the first time I heard this album. It was in 2019. I was on a honeymoon with my wife. It's our 3rd anniversary coming up. Do the math. And the first time we listened to it, we were driving around in Bosnia. And it's funny, she said, when do you think this was? I'm like, 1974. Like, I was able to guess the sound because I sort of guessed, because it sounded to me like music from America in 1968. So I figured there might be like a 4-6 year gap. But we were listening to it, and I was enjoying it then. I love this album now. I liked it then. It didn't take me that long to like this album. I think you'll like it too. And we were driving around. The thing about Bosnia is that it's really weird. It's a very interesting place. I have to back up. So part of what made Yugoslavia so interesting is that it was a mixture of many different ethnicities and different countries into one country. In particular, the 3 largest groups, you had Muslims, Christians, and Orthodox, and Muslims, Catholics, and Orthodox Christians. Okay? They all sort of lived together. They all had a history. It was tenuous. When the Civil War happened, all those people fractured. So it's a really sad history because for a long time they managed to have a rather thriving society that was one of the best examples of how tenets of socialism and non-capitalist societies can function well and in harmony. But when it fell apart nasty. But Bosnia is like a mini Yugoslavia. And I'm going to be pissing people off. If you're from former Yugoslavia, I know you're going to get mad at me. You can correct me in the comments. Please know I'm doing everything in my best effort to be honest and true. And still, some of the things might bother you. I am coming from an American perspective, and I understand that. But it's a fascinating country because it's comprised of Muslims, Orthodox Christians, and Catholics. They're known as Bosniaks, those are the Muslims, Serbs, those are the Orthodox Christians, and Croats. So if you go back to the war in the 90s, and there's all these factions going against each other, and then we have this one country that comes out of it that tries to be all 3 things at once. And if you look at the flag, the flag is 3-sided. They have 3 presidents at once. It's this amazingly tenuous thing. And I'm going to be telling you this over and over again. If you can only visit one country in the world, go to Bosnia. I'm a professor of French, okay? I love France. France will always be there. Bosnia might not always be there. It's an amazing place because of this mixture of these 3 cultures. So what was the first time I heard Indexi? I was driving through a part of Bosnia called Republika Srpski, something like that. The Republic of the Serbs. And while we're listening to this music, we drive by a building, and on the side of the building, first of all of the street signs are written in Cyrillic, which is the funny alphabet that's only used in Serbia. It wasn't used in Croatia, it wasn't used in Bosnia, so ethnic Serbs will often use that alphabet as a way of saying Serbian pride, Serbian nationalism. So we're driving through these streets, and on the side of a wall, while listening to Indexi, I see a giant mural of Ratko Mladic, a war criminal who's in jail right now, hopefully for the rest of his life, murderer of many people, terrible figure, as evil and as destructive as any Nazi war criminal. And I'm in Bosnia, and there's a painting of him on the wall. Okay? So when I say you need to go to Bosnia, that's part of the reason why. Can this really hold? Where the person who was the primary military commander behind the siege of Sarajevo, which I'll get into soon, is featured on a mural inside of the country. It seems as though those fractions are breaking up. So what does that have to do with this music, with Indexi? It's before that. Of course, there were Muslims and Christians and, Muslims and Catholics and Orthodox, of course. But they're all in Indexi. They were all in the band. I don't know the numbers. There have been many members of the band. But the vitality of the country, the freedom and the love that can exist between people despite their ethnic divisions, that thing that we hope for, that we want, harmony and love and peace, mir, that's what we want for our children. You're not going to find it in the streets with the murals and the people and the gritting of the teeth and talking about the history and eradicating the... No, you're going to find it in the music. This is why it's so important that we don't just say, oh, I don't understand all the words to this music. I just need to stop listening. I want to listen to the Beatles. I want to listen to English music. No, challenge yourself. Experience this. Have something to say about Bosnia that isn't just, oh, wasn't there a war there? Music is transnationalist when it's at its best, even though it represents Bosnia. And probably most people who are watching this, realistically, are going to be Bosnians. And they're going to be proud of their country, as well they should be. But what they're proud about isn't that I'm born in the best place and everywhere else is bad. That's nationalism. But the human achievement that is represented by this excellent band. That's part of the reason I do this channel, is to really try to emphasize the beauty of humanity in the face, not just of fascism, but in the face of nationalism. Smirt fascismu, smirt nationalismu. Death to nationalism. That's what I say. I might actually make t-shirts and give them away. Sarajevo is also the coolest city I've ever visited. I'm just going to say it. The Austro-Hungarian influence is there and the Turkish influence is there. The architecture is gorgeous. There's a lot of things to do. You can see Gavrilo Princip's gun that started World War I, the most consequential gun in the history of humanity, and it's just sitting there in a $3 museum. And oh my God, the best food I've ever eaten is in Sarajevo. I'm including all of France. I'm including all of Italy. I've traveled all over the world. There are places in Korea that were close, but the best food I've ever eaten was in Sarajevo. One restaurant called Preporod is the best restaurant I've ever been in. And then this is a burek restaurant. Burek is this amazing, look it up, it's an amazing food to eat. And this isn't a poster. This is the wrapper that they used to wrap up the burek, and it was so good that I brought it home and I framed it. Again, it's not just a place of war, it's a place of humanity, of food and music. Before I finally get to the music itself, I want to just say one more symbolic thing about this greater theme, about how music can overcome disasters, how music can transcend human stupidity. When you go to Sarajevo, you're going to spend a lot of time looking down, okay? Now you can look up, there's a beautiful mosque, there's beautiful buildings from hundreds of years, funny pigeons everywhere. But you end up looking down at these little things called Sarajevo roses. So during the war, when Serbian forces did not want Bosnia to secede, Serbian forces encircled the city and bombarded the city. Okay? This is a historical fact. This is what happened. Okay? Led by Ratko Mladic, that guy who had the mural. Okay? Women, children, men died from sniper fire. They died from shells. They died from starvation. This happened in my lifetime. While I was goofing around, all I was doing, I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know people were suffering and dying at that exact moment. I didn't want to know. I didn't care. I'm a big American, so screw me, right? But that's what was happening in my lifetime. And when these shells hit the ground, they leave this just all the shrapnel, and they leave a little crater. And someone had the brilliant idea to fill those craters with a red plastic substance, so that they look like roses on the ground. And on the one hand, this is beautiful. It's about the city's resilience. It's about their ability to rise up and to survive in these terrible times. On another side, it's bad because it's holding on to that resentment and anger. It's, really holding on to it. Now, I think the good outweighs the bad, but still, it's interesting. When you leave things destroyed from war as a reminder that the war is still there, it's also a way of not allowing yourself to move on past the war. So when you're in Sarajevo, you'll be crying. I mean, I was crying so much of the time. It's a very painful place to be because there's people who live there who were children and whose brothers and sisters were shot, okay? It's that kind of place. And then you have all these reminders. But if you go walking kind of near the mosque, kind of near the university, there's this nice little area where there's lots of these like little gelato stands, like toy stores and music stores, and you look down at the ground. You don't see a Sarajevo rose, you see 2 sets of footprints to mark the location where Indexi started. The place where Indexi started as a band, you have to see by looking down at the ground. And that's the point. That's the point. That's why I'm talking about it. Because yes, the roses are true, and we need to remember, and the burden of history is on us to remember Srebrenica and remember the siege of Sarajevo. That is the burden of history. But there's also the burden of humanity to remember that there's other things, like this awesome band that started in 1962, that 10 years later celebrated their 10-year anniversary. And 2 years after that, thanks to the military service, they released this album, Indexi. Thank you to my wife for giving this album to me. Great cover, first of all. Look at that design, right? Don't you want So what is the album? What is the music even? Like what's it actually about? I've been talking for 20 minutes. I think it's an interesting story, but I haven't even told you really what it is. It's rock. Rock music, okay? Not soft, it's rock. A little bit prog, sometimes folky, but not folk like Joni Mitchell or Bob Dylan, folky like Bosnian, Yugoslavian folk-sounding music. At times it'll be psychedelic. At times, the songs will be kind of long. It reminds me sort of Iron Butterfly, sort of Procol Harum, sort of Deep Purple, and sometimes, even of Frank Zappa. Because when you have a band that's been playing together for 10 years, different members, but just playing and playing and playing and playing and playing, they have chops. They have instrumental virtuosity. And when you listen to this album very carefully, like I have, it's just, there's so many great hooks in the songwriting, and there's so many great instrumental parts, and so many interesting things that are happening with the music, like great guitar solos, or little drum parts, or organ solos. It is an amazingly rich album. Like, you can't just listen to it and have it on the background. I mean, you can. It's a good background music. I mean, I can listen to it while driving through Bosnia, sure. But also, like, it just there's such a depth to it, which I'll get to soon. I was reading this book. I was trying to read it out loud to my wife to show her how good my pronunciation was. And I really cracked her up because I was reading the names of the original members. And I was like, bassista Shefko Askamia, clavisurista George Uzelak, i bumbar Nedim. So instead of bubnyar, which is drummer, I said bumbar, which is bumblebee. And she laughed for like 10 minutes. So the bumbar, the bumblebee, the drummer, is my absolute favorite part of this album. They had like rotating drummers. There's the history of the band is like a cross between Rock Notes on Monty Python and Spinal Tap. Like, they have so many different band members. But at this point, there's someone named Miroslav Sharanovic, and his drums are just so good. It's just a great, like, 70s rock feel. And the guitar is so good, and the bass work is so good. And the singer is mostly good. I don't love the singer. He's probably the weak point on here. The same way that Roger Daltrey is the weak point of The Who, which isn't even really an insult on Roger Daltrey, but realistically, you put those other 3 guys, come on. If you have to kick one member out of The who do you kick out? Daltrey. You have to kick one member out of Zeppelin, who do you kick out? Plant, right? It just happens, and it's that kind of case here. Lyrically, Also, the lead singer, Davorin Popovic, doesn't write anything on the album, so he's just kind of a frontman too, which is interesting. The lyrics are very cohesive for an album that, for a band that had been recording or had been writing songs, and they did record, they just released singles. Like they had very popular singles that would come out and then they'd disappear. So it's not like they never recorded anything, just never something like this. It's an awfully cohesive album that's mostly poetic meditations on the fleeting nature of life. That's what it's about. It's about the fleeting nature of life. So, I'm going to go through each song. I'm going to describe to you what the song is like, what I like about the song, what I find interesting. I'm going to briefly tell you what the songs are about in English. And then, hopefully, you will see me play you the music. Okay, I'm going to go over to my record player, and I'm going to play this record that my wife got for me last year. Now, there's a chance that the copyright goblins are going to come after me and make it that this video is banned. That might happen. So if the copyright goblins come after me, then you're going to get a cut video where I will say, let's have a listen, and it will go to the next song. But that's okay, because you can find this album online. It's on Tidal, it's on Spotify, it's on YouTube. I'll include links up there to where it is if I end up having to skip it, okay? So we'll just see. It's a mystery. I don't know what the algorithm is going to do. But in any event, please subscribe, please smash the like bucket, please comment, because I can't monetize this video because I'm going to be playing music. So I'm putting a lot of effort into it. I mean, I don't need like money, but it's nice. It's nice to get comments. It's nice to get clicks. Please share this, you know? It'd be cool. Especially, I'm very interested to know what you think about my take from a former Yugoslavian perspective. I'm not super interested in the nationalist stuff with people coming on and telling me what did or didn't happen in the 90s. You can if you want. But I don't accept any nationalist in any form. Not in my country, not in any country. That's just my perspective. Smrt nationalismu. I'm not an American nationalist. There's some things I love about my country. There's other things I don't. You know? And I sure as hell am not better than anyone else because I was born here, any more than I'm better than anyone else for the color of my skin. Or the lack of color of my skin. So, let's get to the album, huh? Jeez, am I preachy enough here? Alright. The opening track is an absolute banger. Anything you need to know about this band, this is it, okay? Svijet u Kojem Zivim, the world I live in. This is written mostly by the by the bassist and the guitar player, and this is that musicianship I'm talking about. Just so many different parts, experimental at times, this really rocking intro, slightly off-rhythm drum beats that are coming a little bit behind the beat, reminds you a little bit of kind of krautrocky. Then this other guitar comes in, and then these organs come in, and there's a slight moment of quiet. And then there's these drums and swirling organs that play underneath the vocals. Kind of melismatic, charismatic stuff here. Then a pre-chorus, the boombar, the drummer is going absolutely nuts here. And then we get to an epic chorus that's guitar-led, with just like the melody is playing the same thing. The guitar's playing the melody, but also something else a little bit lower. And then the post-chorus gets quiet, some nice dynamics with like the drums kind of stop and the voice, and then the organ comes in, and then there's like a little drum solo all over this album, little boombar solos after the second chorus where this like guitar is like behind it. So it's like a drum solo, but it's not that everyone stops playing. The guitar is still playing and keeping a sort of standard rhythm. So I mean, the problem with drum solos is when they just play them and people just everywhere. That's not what happens here. There's even a scatting point in the, like scat, like, but it's guitar scatting, so it's scatting with a guitar, very cool, and then clapping and drums at the end. There's just so much space for this melody, and it's totally experimental in a lot of ways. It's totally prog in a lot of ways, and then it's totally pop in a lot of ways, because they repeat this chorus like 1,000 times. Every single song, they repeat it so many times. And unfortunately, almost every track fades out. Fades out on a repetition of the chorus. I hate fade outs, especially when it's a band that I know is capable of playing for hours. I would love just to hear it. And the lyrics here are mystical and existential. Life that belongs to you, that's all you have in the world. Life that belongs to you, that's all you have in the world. Oh yes, I live my life, it's everything I have now. existential, and poetic. Now, if the copyright goblins will permit, let's go over to the record player and have a listen to some. I think I'm going to play some of the start to this, just so you get a sense of just the rocking sounds that this album has. Indexi. Do you hear that rhythmically, how it gets a little bit out of sync, you know? Kind of settles into that groove, and then the singer comes in. I can't stop it. Oh yeah. At times, I even hear a little bit of Keith Moon in there. Do you hear that too? Like his energy kind of gets there. Man, I actually have not listened to this album that loud yet. It is really good, really loud. Is that too loud? She said yes. Okay, I'll play it quieter next time. Happy anniversary. The next song is Krivac Si, which essentially translates, as far as I can tell, to "It's all your fault." I don't love the verse on here, but I love the chorus, and especially the instrumental breaks. I'm going to play you the beginning part here eventually, with this acoustic guitar and drums, and this kind of very funky guitar, more kind of sultry. Another really good chorus, just keeps repeating over and over again. And there's this breakdown. Actually, that's what I'm going to play for you. I'm going to play you this breakdown that, again, reminds me of like Can or Krautrock, with this bass and drums and then like an organ solo and just all these different parts. And there's like an acoustic guitar that comes in, just all these wild changes. Almost like an off-rhythm part then with a voice and the organ and the hi-hat. And then the lyrics, again, are all in this idea, you're wasting your days, it's all your fault. But he's actually talking to is himself. So it's about him wasting his life as opposed to someone else wasting their life. So let's have a listen to this great like instrumental breakdown that is just awesome. And you don't need to speak Serbo-Croatian or Bosnian to be able to understand it because it's mostly instrumental. Right? It's nuts. It's nuts how tight they are. Just great musicianship. You know, and I had to like take this out of the middle because the lyrics are very up front. And like the singing, obviously, like you always hear that. But in a way, it's almost like they're just like this great instrumental band that sometimes has a singer. I'm like really excited after listening to that song. It's such a good one. That instrumental break is so good. I hope you got to watch it and that the copyright goblins did not strike. So Budi Kao More is the next song, Be Like the Sea. And it's got this great intro. It's much softer. It's got this organ sound. The drums are hard and good. And it leads into almost like a Zappa sounding intro. Like if you listen to the weird sort of tonalities that Zappa will sometimes get, especially in the early 70s. And then it gets into basically a crooner style voice with the singing. Cool kind of organ part, like right before the quiet part, great sort of dynamics. I believe they change like modalities, like actual modalities. The drummer changes just a little bit to play a lot more straightforward on the second verse, a beautiful guitar solo, and again, the song fades out. The lyrics here: you listen to me, find the strength, change the world, be just like the sea who with its waves changes the shape of all the shores. This is basically a Taoist belief, that the water is stronger than the mountain. True story, my father collects rocks with holes in them, and now I do too, because it's a sign of that Taoist philosophy that the water will dissolve everything. Right? And that's the truth. So really the philosophical bent of this album, that life is the only thing we have and we must live it and we must be like the sea. So I'll play you a little bit of this song. I'm just going to play that intro that sounds kind of sweet and kind of organy, and then I think kind of Zappa-ish. I'm like really excited after listening to that song. It's such a good one. That instrumental break is so good. I hope you got to watch it and that the copyright goblins did not strike. So Budi Kau More is the next song, Be Like the Sea. And it's got this great intro. It's much softer. It's got this organ sound. The drums are hard and good. And it leads into almost like a Zappa sounding intro. Like if you listen to the weird sort of tonalities that Zappa will sometimes get, especially in the early 70s. And then it gets into basically a crooner style voice with the singing. Cool kind of organ part, like right before the quiet part, great sort of dynamics. I believe they change like modalities, like actual modalities. The drummer changes just a little bit to play a lot more straightforward on the second verse, a beautiful guitar solo, and again, the song fades out. The lyrics here: you listen to me, find the strength, change the world, be just like the sea who with its waves changes the shape of all the shores. This is basically a Taoist belief, that the water is stronger than the mountain. True story, my father collects rocks with holes in them, and now I do too, because it's a sign of that Taoist philosophy that the water will dissolve everything. Right? And that's the truth. So really the philosophical bent of this album, that life is the only thing we have and we must live it and we must be like the sea. So I'll play you a little bit of this song. I'm just going to play that intro that sounds kind of sweet and kind of organy, and then I think kind of Zappa-ish. And then it settles into this kind of croonery thing. Now this next one, Sam Ja Netko, If I Were Something, it's a lot more of an aggressive start. Like guitar and drums just go right at it with a little bit of a strange meter. Eventually the organ comes in, the guitar comes crashing back. All the way throughout we have this kind of swirling organ, and the drums are almost like a march, slightly militaristic drums. Kind of a cheesy pre-chorus, but then this like loud guitar saves it. And what makes this song most interesting, I think, is the lyrics. So it was written by a woman named Maya... Let's see, how am I going to pronounce this? Perfilyeva? Did I pronounce that right? Perfilyeva? Perfilyeva? I think that's how you say it. Who apparently was married to or a girlfriend of one of the members. And I guess she was a professor of English or a professor of literature, probably not English, a professor of literature in Split, I think, in Croatia. So we definitely get that sense with these lyrics, which are quite fascinating, really. If I were someone, I'd erase all the wrinkles from all the mothers. I'd make the fathers love them, to return them love gone by, and peacefully live by the hours. So this sort of feminist statement and a statement against ageism kind of slipped into this hard-rocking rock album. But again, I call this a hard-rocking rock album, but at least for American and British hard-rocking rock albums, they're usually defined by their tremendous stupidity, right? Just young men talking about things that young men like talking about, like drugs and drinking and women and all that stuff. This very much isn't that. The whole album Even though this might be the most sort of meditative song on the album, or maybe the deepest song on the album in its choice of topic, it's still in an album that is mostly about much larger themes. So let's have a listen to just that first bit, that kind of harder edge. And I think it kind of shows how, the last song had that little bit of organ to it to sound a little bit like sweeter, and then this one gets a little bit harder rocking. You feel that, right? That kind of like pulsing, driving sound. And then it goes into this sweeter style, and it is interesting because you can feel the division in the band, where to a certain extent they're almost like in the kind of European cheesy sort of schlagery style of singing, kind of croonery at times, the way he sings and the way the songs are written. And then you'll have these other moments that are just like very intense musicianship and interesting rhythms, and I don't know, I love that tension in this band. And maybe that tension's a little bit like the socio-political tensions implied in the country itself. I'm going too far. Let's flip over the album. You see it says Yugoslavian Records, who produced basically all the records back then. All right, on to side B. Side B is really where this album, at least for me, gets really, really good. I like side B more than side A, but they go really well together. But I think side B just hits maybe deeper, like the songs just hit on a more emotional level. They're maybe a little bit catchier, I don't know. But Sve Ove Godine, like some other year is basically a way to translate that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments if you have a better idea. I just love this song. And I'll tell you, it's because it's got this chorus that's so catchy. It's almost like bubblegum pop in America. It's just one of those choruses that's so catchy. I have it going in my head. Sve ove godine, dala bi za jednu noć, a mene nikad ne bivala, ja je moram od drugoj poć. Like, poć. I just have it stuck in my head at all times. I'll just be walking around the house, just like, noć, poć. And okay, so it's a very catchy song, but there's a lot more to it. I mean, it starts off in the beginning with these acoustic guitars that are super sweeping, with more of that great boombar drum playing. The guitar does this kind of cute declarative notes, and then just breaks into this verse with just great singing, and there's these little punctuations at the end of the lines, like, there, and then just that chorus. And the chorus is repeated so many times. There's eventually like a drum solo that goes into a key change. The lyrics, these are the worst lyrics on the album. That's for sure. They're about basically a groupie and saying no to a groupie. I mean, that's kind of rare. Actually, come to think about it, the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin have so many songs about saying yes to groupies. You would give it up for one night, but you wouldn't ever have me because I have to go to another woman. Drugoj poć. But I'm just going to play you this chorus, and it'll get stuck in your head, and it'll be there forever. And it's just a great example of what this band can be, where it is simultaneously a pop hook factory and an interesting prog psychedelic rock band. Okay, I got a little too excited. That's what that chorus does to me. I love the way that language sounds, Bosnian, Serbo-Croatian, whatever. It's all the same language family. Just that word noć for a night. It's just such a pleasing sound. Like try saying it at home. Noche. Just, it's a really fun thing to say. Next song is called Sanjam, which means I dream. And there's a story that goes along with this song. So, my wife is the reason that, I'm a happy human being. And she's the reason I'm doing this video in two ways. She gave me the album and I'm making it for her. And also, she told me that when she was younger, she once performed this song for her troop. She was in Scouts. Scouts have been, for boys and girls in most of the world. America's slow to the party on that. And apparently, she performed this song with just a piano player, and she sang it. And I've never heard her sing. Now, I know she can sing, but I've never heard her sing. And I was telling her this morning, if I had to choose between seeing Jimi Hendrix playing at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 or seeing you sing this song for your Scouts, I totally would have picked this. It's a very fun image to imagine her in her little sort of scouting uniform, which is often sort of like ex-military, like ex-Yugoslav military uniforms and stuff. Just imagine her singing this beautiful song, which on the album, as I'll play for you, is like an acoustic guitar. The drummer, just again, he's such a smart drummer. He's playing like hi-hats and then these ride cymbals that are punctuating the sounds. The vocals here are really gorgeous. There's even sort of, and this is what I'll play for you, kind of a folk style, like a Yugoslavian folk style way that it's sung. There's a melismatic quality to the singing, which might sound to you like Arabic or like Turkish, which makes sense because a lot of the folk music in that region was inspired by Turkish folk music, because it was all part of the Ottoman Empire at one point, or much of it was part of the Ottoman Empire. There's kind of a church-like quality to this song. I said this band reminds me of Procol Harum, a very overlooked rock band from the 60s that did Whiter Shade of Pale and used organs quite well. But like there's like using an organ, and then there's using an organ in a way where it feels like you're sort of at church. This has that kind of church feeling. The lyrics are quite erotic, which is quite funny to me. It's all about him dreaming of a woman. I dream of your hot hand wandering across my body. But then it all goes back. It all goes back to the central theme of the album, where he talks about wasting his life. He's wasting his life thinking about this girl. He has one life, and he's wasting it. Okay, so let's listen to just the chorus with that style that reminds me, and you can tell me if you agree, if you're from the Yugoslavian region, whether or not you agree this actually has that influence just peeking in a little bit. So in particular, the way he pronounces these vowels and sings. That Creole, that reminds me of some of that folk music that I've heard. And he's going to repeat the chorus over and over again until it fades out. Okay, so that last song might have been the song that my wife sang, but in her opinion, the next one is the best track on the album, Plima, which means tide. So we have a whole bunch of different themes on this album. We have the themes of life and appreciating it, that we should be like the sea, and now we have this theme of tide. So there's this kind of water theme as well, which, the idea of waves and the cyclical nature of existence. It's a very Zen, very sort of Eastern philosophy album, if you look at it. This is maybe the most experimental song on the album, kind of a psychedelic opening with like ululating and this piano twirl, reverb on this organ, the most Keith Mooney drums that we hear on the album. The chorus is just going on and on about not being alone. It kind of comes back, like there's this great melody that's played in the guitar and maybe even some strings. But it's the instrumental bits, again, here that make this song so fascinating. There's a guitar solo after the chorus, but then there's this quiet moment and this really bizarre, awesome, psychedelic part of the song, where there's the sounds of waves, but not really waves, but it's like almost like distortion from the organ, and this weird epic guitar solo that actually reminds me of like The Good and the Bad and the Ugly soundtrack by Angelo Badalamenti. It has that kind of sound to it. It's a very bizarre solo, by this Krivac Si, who's a great guitarist, really seems to be the heart of the band here. And then it comes back again with the chorus. And this is, my wife also really likes the Doors. It's been a sort of topic of debate because sometimes I don't like the Doors and sometimes I do. In general, I like them. But that's obviously one of the things that they were able to do so well, was have weird parts to their songs and then tag them with the chorus again. I mean, take a look at the Other Side, you know. The Other Side, right? Like it's like a 10-minute song with this like 9 minutes in the middle, but they come back with the chorus to make sure that you're sort of saved. You're not just left out in psychedelia land. And they do that here. Very kind of sad lyrics on this song. If someone that's someone that tells me you're not alone, I'm just so tired and I wait for waves, waves from the sea. So let's have a listen to that cool intersection that I'm talking about with that very interesting guitar solo, which as far as I can tell doesn't sound like anything I've heard in other music. Isn't that a wild guitar sound? And then comes back with the chorus. I'm going to cut it off before it fades out again. So let's close the album with the final track, Balada, Ballad. It's a nice outro track. I mean, I think it's a well-constructed album. It's always nice when albums start rocking and they end calm. It's a expected format, but it's a good one. Kind of a smoky, weird organ to begin. Very kind of like a virtuosic Spanish-sounding guitar. There's a weird thing where if you listen to this on streaming services, some streaming services, there's this bizarre echo that makes it sound more psychedelic than it is. But this is maybe Popovic's best singing voice here. There's a really, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play sort of the end of one of the singing parts into a really gorgeous instrumental part. The song is sort of about birds. Temporarily, everything is like a bird's flight. Oh, her, yes, I loved, because to me she was the whole world, red flower of mine. So it's sort of, you know, about this girl and this sort of fleeting nature of love. It's interesting, the red flower, because again, this predates the existence of Sarajevo roses by 29, 30 years. But it is interesting having the idea of a red flower come to us from this music, and as a reminder, the most important thing to look at when you're staring at the ground in Sarajevo is the place where Indexi started. So I'm going to play you just a little bit of this section here. Just gorgeous, isn't it? Little bird sounds, right? And that little flute in there, it's all just fluttering birds, like the Yugoslavian bird. So there's my review, my third in the series of ex-Yugoslavian rock albums you should really know. You might be able to figure out what the fourth entry in this series will probably be if you look around behind me. See if you can guess. Tell me in the comments. I love doing this series. It's really fun. I love connecting to my wife, connecting to her culture, and really having the excuse to connect to any other culture on this level. I mean, I went to a Turkish food festival today, and I heard some of the music. It was so great. It was this song about Ankara, and it was just this beautiful song. And I just thought, like, wow, you know? Like, if my wife were Turkish, maybe I'd be sitting here doing a whole video about Ankara. Right? And it's just, there's so much to explore. There's so much to learn. There's so much to connect with all these 8 billion people who live on Earth. And what better way than connect to the music, you know? And food. Burak and Indexi. Bosnia's given us a lot of great things. I know they didn't invent Burak. Don't get mad at me in the comments for what I just said about Burak. The best Burak is in Bosnia. Don't get mad at me. Don't get mad at me for saying that. I just said it. I'm a stupid American. But you can tell me if you think there's better Burak. I've had Burak in 5 countries now, I think. Anyways, these are my Patreons. They help me to make videos. They give me money. You can join me, patreon.com/Professor Sky. Especially with a video like this, where I can't monetize it. That's nice. Got the coffee stain down there. That's a little authentic. Anyways, so thank you to all these people very, very, very much. And thank you all for sharing this with me. And let me know, did you like the music? Are you going to check it out? And I just stopped talking. The real anniversary to my gift is if I go right upstairs and help her finish painting the kids' bathroom. Okay, till next time. There's the camera.